What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Sloppy Saturdays. And today we are going over Oregon's receiving room, how we believe personally Oregon may have the most talent and the most depth out of any receiver room in the entire country. We're going to talk about 6 or 7 players that really could start for this Oregon room right now. We're going to talk about why I believe it's so influential for Dan Lanning and his coaching staff to manage this room right as well. When we look at NIL, transfer portal, the new age of college football, when you have so many stars in your receiver room, it is important when and how you give these receivers the opportunity. Because if you don't manage this room right, you're going to have some of these receivers leave. This is why, again, we've talked about in this episode consistently how high we view Brian Hartline to have the amount of stars he had in his tenure at Ohio State and to be able to manage the room right, keeping all those receivers in your program and giving them the right opportunity when the time comes. I feel like Dan Lanning and his coaching staff is going to have to do a very similar thing. Like I said, I feel like this is the deepest wide receiver room in the entire country. When we look at the 3 guys that I believe that are going to start for them, and then we also have 2 5 stars that could possibly be on the bench for them, consistently rotating for them in that fourth receiver role. Then you also talk about another 2 receivers after that have significant production in college football. This wide receiver room, it's going to be very scary. Like I said, I think it's very important how everything manages. Why I also believe this wide receiver room is so special, also along with the running back room as well. We're going to probably do another episode diving into their running back room when we look at a Jordan Davison and a Dakorien Hill, 2 running back freshmen that I believe were the 2 best running back freshmen possibly in the entire country. Like, this Oregon future is absolutely insane. When we look at Dante Moore staying another year, like, that was huge for them. Nobody possibly ever thought Dante Moore was going to stay another year. I mean, that guy was slotted at the number 2 overall pick. We definitely discussed the risks he's taken staying in college football, but it's a home run for Oregon. Then also you have former 5-star Dylan Raiola behind him that's going to start the year after Dante Moore goes into the NFL draft. And with the amount of talent in this room, like, there's going to be at least 4 high-level, high-star receivers that are going to play next year for Oregon as well. So he's going to be going into a phenomenal situation. Like I said, along with the running backs as well, in Jordan Davison, Dakorien Hill being in this room another year with Dylan Raiola. Like, Dylan Raiola is going to have a phenomenal situation he's going to walk into. And then also these wide receivers are also going to be able to develop into arguably the best quarterback in the country in Dante Moore. So Oregon just has a phenomenal situation with everybody. But like I said, with all the talent in this room, it's very important for this coaching staff to manage this talent right, because this talent could walk out the door if they believe they're not getting the right opportunities in this Oregon system. Now that all that's being said, let's go into each receiver one by one. We're going to discuss, like I said, who I think is going to be the starters going into day one. We're also going to discuss some of the potential opportunity for these 4th, 5th receivers to be possibly one of the best receivers in the country one day. Let's get into it all. First off, we have Dakorien Moore. Dakorien Moore is going to be one of the best receivers in the country next year, in my opinion. Dakorien Moore was the number 1 receiver going into his class last year. Last year, I believe, was kind of rocky for him because of the injuries he dealt with, especially during later in the season when you could look like a guy in Dakorien Moore to develop. But Dakorien Moore is an elite route runner that gets elite separation. Not only that, if this guy primarily plays in the slot, he's going to possibly be the best slot receiver in the entire country. I do think he's going to have the opportunity to do that in this Oregon offense, because I do think the 2 guys he's playing with can go in and out of the slot. So I think Dakorien Moore is definitely going to eat out of the slot. Like I said, with his separation, his route running, his elite speed, he could possibly be one of the best receivers in the country. Not only that, paired up with a guy like Dante Moore, who's going to be a top 3 quarterback in the country, sky's the limit for Dakorien Moore this year. I also love Dakorien Moore, like we see in the beginning of last year, how he could be an extension of the run game as well. I do expect this guy to definitely get handoffs, wide receiver screens. Like, I do expect him to play behind the line of scrimmage a lot as well. Dakorien Moore could have the opportunity to be the best receiver in his room for sure. And I think most likely it's going to be their wide receiver 1. Then also we look who could be fighting for that wide receiver 1 spot as well. We were talking about Evan Stewart. Evan Stewart, very similar to Dante Moore. Another guy, if you would have asked me 2 years ago, no way he would be playing for this Oregon team in 2025. But Evan Stewart was a guy that we expected to be a first-round receiver in the NFL draft, possibly going into this year. We all know at this time last year, around this time before the season started, he did get injured. I do think hindsight for Evan Stewart was 2020, because when we look at Oregon's run last year, there was rumored, everybody knows who follows Oregon heavily, there was rumor that he was going to play in that college football playoff run, and he was definitely available to play in that run. He did not end up playing in that run, which, like I said, was crucial for his development, because if he would have got on the field too early, who knows what would have happened. Him not playing in that run, I don't think it mattered for Oregon mightily based on the outcome of that Indiana game. I don't think one player would have changed that game. So Evan Stewart getting that full rest, that full recovery going into the season, I think it's phenomenal. Why I also believe Evan Stewart is such a great pairing for this Oregon starting lineup. One, like we said, there are a lot of young guys in the rotation for this Oregon team. He is that one veteran. When we look at Evan Stewart, a 5-star transfer playing 2 years at Texas A&M, then playing on that 2024 season with Oregon where they only had one loss, and he was a mighty contributor. I think Evan Stewart really carves out his own unique role on this Oregon team. And like I said, this is a wide receiver with top 5 upside in the entire country if he comes back from this injury the way we think he could. Again, it's all going to be dependent on how he comes back for this injury, because with the type of injury that he had, again, there is a lot of question marks surrounding it. And just by Evan Stewart's durability in the history of college football and his history, that's the one thing you're really banking on with Evan Stewart. How he comes off this injury and how healthy he is. Because when we look at Texas A&M and we also look at his Oregon career, he had a lot of health concerns. His durability is an issue. But Evan Stewart, like I said, was a guy that was supposed to be drafted in the first 2 rounds of the NFL draft. I think he still could definitely do that if he comes back from his injury the right way with his ability to play inside and outside, and with the quarterback pairing he's developed with in Dakorien Moore. And like I said, how great this offense is going to be with the running backs and the receiver depth. Evan Stewart really has the ability to recoup his stock and be a first 2 to 3 round receiver in the NFL draft. Like I said, it's all about the injury, how that injury is going to hamper him. Now we also get into Jeremiah McClellan. The wide receiver 3 spot for this Oregon team is definitely in the balance. I really do believe it's going to go to Jeremiah McClellan, though. Jeremiah McClellan, and I believe Oregon was very fortunate to get Jeremiah McClellan to flip from Ohio State to Oregon. I think this guy is such a talented receiver. I think he's super underrated. When we look at Jeremiah McClellan last year and his stats, this was a guy with 500-plus yards and 3 touchdowns last year as a freshman coming in to a room where he was not the starter right away, and there were a lot of options. I mean, when we look at the starters going into this year, when we look at Dakorien Moore, Malik Benson, Gary Bryant, Jeremiah McClellan was not getting significant work in the beginning of the season. Then we also saw how this room was injured mightily, and Jeremiah McClellan, I really believe, showed that he's a starting receiver in college football, and he has all the talent to get behind defenses. I think he showed a lot this season, and I think with his production at the back end of the season when Oregon really needed it, really puts him in place to be the wide receiver 3 in this talented Oregon room. I like him. I think the talent's there. I think, again, his versatility's there. I think Jeremiah McClellan is going to be that number 3 receiver. Now we get into very, very unique territory, and these are guys that I think Oregon really has to retain in their room with the talent that these guys possess. It's going to be very interesting how Dan Lanning and their staff manages these talents. So the first guy I really want to get into is Gatlin Bair. Gatlin Bair, and I said it, Dakorien Moore was one of the best recruits at the wide receiver position, one of the most hyped recruits at the wide receiver position that Oregon has ever had. But Gatlin Bair, with his phenomenal talent that we don't see in wide receivers in the NFL very often, he could be the best receiver in this Oregon room when his time is done. When we look at Gatlin Bair, he was a 5-star number 6 receiver in his class, but he has Olympic world-class speed. When we look at Gatlin Bair, he ran a 10.15 in the 100-meter. To put reference on that, there's only 100 people that has ever did that in the world. And we compare him to some people like Tyreek Hill in high school, ran a 10.19. He was faster at the 100-meter than Tyreek Hill. Noah Lyles, who's, again, one of the most famous track Olympic athletes, ran a 10.14 in high school in the 100 meters. So Gatlin Bair, you're looking at the fastest player possibly in college football. But not only that, Gatlin Bair is 6'3". So this is a guy that's not limited. He's not under 6 feet for a wide receiver. So he has the possibility to be able to play on the outside and could also contest the catch. He could develop into a complete receiver with Olympic level speed. Sky's the limit for Gatlin Bair and how he develops at Oregon. Now, my biggest issue with Gatlin Bair, again, I don't want to even phrase it as an issue because I don't diminish anybody's beliefs or values, but Gatlin Bair was a 2024 recruit. So you're saying, I never heard of Gatlin Bair. Why is he not play for Oregon? He was on a 2-year missionary retreat. Now, again, when you're in a 2-year missionary retreat, you're also playing for Oregon in their practices in spurts as well. So it's not like this guy has dropped a football, but I don't care how gifted of an athlete you are. When you're developing in this certain window, and there's no doubt this window still might be there for Gatlin Bear with how great of an athlete he is, but this window for a developing athlete is minuscule. And if you let that window pass, it is almost impossible to get back in that window. So I think that's the biggest question mark for Gatlin Bear. Like when you look at a 6'3" receiver with Olympic track speed, guy that was faster in high school than Tyreek Hill, could be the fastest receiver in college football, you're looking at a hidden gem for Oregon. But again, is he going to be ready to play in game this season? That's a big question mark with this 2-year missionary retreat that he did go on. Again, even if he's not ready to be an every down receiver this season, I do think there are unique ways you could use Gatlin Bear because, again, like I said, with his rare speed that just doesn't come in college football, I think, again, whether it's going to be in the special teams game or whether it's going to be a gadget guy on certain plays as a deep threat, like Gatlin Bear is going to work his way on the field somehow with this speed. This speed is speed that you don't get ever really in a receiver. So he's going to have a role. It's just going to be interesting. He's ever going to be able to crack the starting lineup this year if he's going to be that consistent number 4 receiver. Because now we're getting into a guy in Jalen Lott who was arguably their best recruit in this entire cycle for Oregon. You're looking at the number 3 receiver in this class, and you're looking at an elite route runner with great body control as well. So now you're looking at a 5-star in Jalen Lott that was the number 3 receiver in this class that has Dakorien Moore in front of him, Evan Stewart in front of him, Jeremiah McClennan possibly in front of him, and also Gatlin Bear possibly in front of him. Again, for Jalen Lott, I do think he's going to get his opportunity. And same with Gatlin Bear as well, because then again, you look next year, Evan Stewart is going to be in the NFL. So you're going to have Jalen Lott and Gatlin Bear being at least top 4 receivers probably for this Oregon program, along with Dakorien Moore and Jeremiah McClennan. Again, like I said, with Jeremiah McClennan, I do believe everything that he showed towards the end of the season and his talent with his 1-year experience in college football, I do think it's going to get him the number 3 spot. But these guys in Gatlin Bear and Jalen Lott are going to be knocking on the door for sure. And I do think Dakorien Moore, again, obviously is going to have his starting role in this offense. And then Evan Stewart, again, it is dependent on this injury, how he comes back. But if he comes back like the Evan Stewart, we know he's going to have that starting role for sure. So again, Jalen Lott, Gatlin Bear, it's going to be very interesting to see how Oregon uses these guys and how much time they give them, because these are guys that could definitely walk out the door in the new age of college football. Then you also look at 2 more guys in Iverson Hook and Justin Lowe. Justice Lowe is a guy that had significant production on his 2024 Oregon team that, again, was their best team really to date in the last 5-6 years. Justice Lowe, really good receiver. I think he's a great depth piece for this Oregon team. Then you also look at Iverson Hooks as well. Iverson Hooks was a guy that transferred this year from UAB to Oregon. He had 997 yards and 7 touchdowns with UAB. I think for Iverson Hooks, he made a really bad move going to this Oregon team because I don't really see how he cracks the rotation with how many absolute superstars are here for Oregon. But again, could he get a depth role? Possibly. I just don't see how this guy makes a starting lineup in a pivotal year for Iverson Hooks. I don't think this was the right transfer portal move. But again, for Oregon, doesn't hurt. You have more depth. But like I said, summing up this video, it's going to be very interesting to see how Oregon manages his talent. Very similar, like I said, with Brian Hartline. People think it's very easy by having all these stars in this room. But I think the biggest thing for these coaching staffs is how do you keep everybody in this room for a multitude of years? Dakorien Moore, believe, is going to be an absolute superstar in college football. Evan Stewart, I truly believe if he comes back the way we think he can, he's going to be a top 3 round receiver in this upcoming and next year's upcoming NFL draft. Jeremiah McClennan, I do really believe in this guy. I do think he showed great ability to be a starting receiver in college football in this tape, and I do think he has a ton of talent. Gatlin Bear, like I said, sky's the limit for this guy when you're looking at Olympic level speed at 6'3". Jalen Lott, number 3 receiver in the class. Again, this is a guy that could be a superstar this year as well. It's absolutely insane. Then, like we said, Iverson Hooks and Justin Lowe, they're really depth pieces to me. But like I said also, for Dylan Raiola, I believe he made the right move because when you look at Dakorien Moore, Jeremiah McClennan, Gatlin Bear, and Jalen Lott being his receivers after this year, and also when you look at Jordan Davison and De'Aaron Hill, we know anything could happen, but I mean, you're looking at absolute superstars Dylan Raiola is going to play with. And then also for these like 7 receivers to also be developing with arguably the best quarterback in college football in Dante Moore. Wow. Sky is the limit for this wide receiver room, for this Oregon offense in general for the next few years. Just going to be very interesting to see how this Oregon staff manages all this young talent. That wraps up this episode of Sloppy Saturdays. Drop down below your thoughts on Oregon's future, along with really Oregon's wide receivers room's future. And that wraps up this episode for Sloppy Saturdays, and we are